Okay, now that we've got the logic in our activity store to go and get the activity from our API or get it from memory if we have it loaded in memory, what we need to do is see how we can make use of this parameter that we've got in our root so that we can pass that information to our store so that we can then get the activity and load it inside our component here. So let's go back to the React router documentation, and inside the API and inside the hooks, then we've got an option to say use params, and use params returns an object of key value pairs of URL parameters, and to use it to access match.params of the current route. So inside our root parameters, when we've specified an ID, the root key here is going to be ID, which matches what we've got in the root in our code. And the value, of course, is going to be the activity ID. So we can make use of that hook inside our code. And let's go to the activity details component. And let's clean up the tabs at the top. And what we want to do is get the ID from our root parameter. So what we can do to do that is say const, and then we'll destructure this from our root parameters, and we'll say const ID equals use params. And it's given us a warning here telling us that the property ID does not exist on type objects. Okay, fine. And that means we just need to tell our params about the information inside the object of our params. And we've got, so we'll just add the type information in angle brackets, open some curly brackets, and then we can specify the ID as a type of string inside here, and the error goes away. So what we want to do here is use a use effect, of course, because we want a side effect to occur when we load this particular component. So we'll say use effect, and inside here we'll add the callback function, and what we'll do is we'll check to see if we have an ID. And if we do, then we're going to load the activity, which we need to get from the activity store. So let's also destructure the load activity function, and we'll say if ID load activity, and we'll pass in the ID. And we also need the dependencies for this, and what we'll specify is the ID as a dependency and the load activity function as another dependency there. And then what we also need, so that we set our loading indicator correctly, is we also need our loading initial flag from the activity store as well, and then we can specify loading initial, or we don't have an activity. Now this is temporary at the moment. I'm aware that if we do not find an activity in our API, this will cause our loading spinner to stay active. Once again, we haven't dealt with error handling, so at the moment we're just concentrating on getting things working with the happy path. So we're going to presume that we have an activity that matches the ID stored in our database. And yes, of course, you will be able to change the URL directly if you wanted to break your application and just see a permanent loading spinner, but we haven't done anything to code it that way yet, or to prevent that behavior. So we'll leave this in place as well. So this, in effect, should be all we need to do. And if we go take a look, then we can see we've got our activity. Inside here, if we refresh the page, we see loading, and we still see loading, and there's nothing there to turn it off. Aha! Now, why could this be? And a little challenge for yourself is to pause the video and see if you can work out what it is. And hopefully you give that a go, and I'm going to go through what the problem is. And it's the typical problem. We're not observing the observable. So our component, our details component, has got no idea that the loading initial flag has changed because it's not observing the observable. So it's not being notified of the state change. So easy fix for this is to make our activity details an observer. So we'll say export default observer, and then we'll wrap our function inside parenthesis. And what we should find, if we go back and refresh the page, is that we're still loading permanently. And let's take a look. And of course, the other reason for not turning off the loading flag is that we could have simply forgot to do this inside the store itself. And if we take a look, and the mistake I made in this particular case, two mistakes really. There's the lack of the observer function, and if you spotted this, then well done. And the other mistake I made is we also need to set this .selected activity to the activity, and this will then match what we're doing up here. So if we go back and take a look, what we should find if we refresh the page now is that we do indeed load our activity after we've got it back from the API. And if we go back to the activities, we're missing our loading indicator actually when we go back to the activity list, but if we click on any of the activities, we'll see it instantly. Then if we refresh the page, we'll still see the activity. And if we go back to the activities, then we're missing our loading spinner there. So what we'll do just to clean that up as well is in our load activities, we'll just say this.loading initial equals true, just so that we've got a consistent loading spinner there. And if we go and refresh the page once again, and view, and then refresh again to clear the activities from memory and go back to the activities, then we see the loading spinner. Don't worry about any flickering for now. And we also need to remove what's going on the right hand side here because we've still got an activity selected. So what we can do is head back to our activity dashboard, and what we can do here is clean out this code here. We do not need to show this on the right hand side anymore. And what we'll do is replace it with an H2, and what's going to go there later is an activity filters component. But we don't have it in place yet, so we'll just remove the components from there, and then we can clean up the unused imports at the top, and we can remove the destructured props from our activity store there. We don't actually need those either. And that all looks fine. Let's just go back to our app, refresh the page, make sure we can see the activity, make sure we can refresh the page and still see the activity, and that's looking good. Next on our list is to deal with the editing of an activity, and we'll take a look at that next.